Welcome all. You know you're in an old place. There were older towers, there were older cottages, but there probably isn't an older combination anyplace, so that's our bragging rights. Get that out of the way right away. The Historical Society took this building over from the town in 1967. Vote of town meeting gave custody and administration to the Historical Society. When the federal government had sold the light to the town, the condition was that it be maintained as a historic site. Right? And if we don't do that, it goes back to the feds. We don't want that to happen. So the society gets control of it in 67, 68, and they put a caretaker here ever since. And I'm the latest iteration. We were appointed, my wife and I, 17 years ago this week. When we moved in the following February, there were a lot of things went wrong for my predecessor, who she was trying to get set up in another place. So she stayed until she handed me the key on Valentine's Day, 2009. And it's been quite a ride. Lots of storms. I probably like them more than I should. My daughter grew up here. It made an enormous difference in her life to be here at 100 Lighthouse instead of at 50 or a different number. People came from everywhere, and she learned to talk to all of them. It really has made a big difference in her life. And in the end, I probably benefited more than anybody. I teach history for a living. And now you come home every day and you just extend the day and teach some more. It was roughly 8 years ago, 7.5, 8 years ago, that I noticed a lot of water in the lantern room. It was much more wet. It was difficult to get the door open, to get outside, to tend to anything. We had the flagpole on the tower at that point. You'd have to go out. You could see seams lifting on the deck outside. And in the fall, I would go out with as wide a tape as I could find and spray and try to seal those seams up, because we knew we had a problem. We had money advanced by community preservation to get some engineering done. A number of engineers came out and never came back. Time passed. I made calls. I think in the end there were about 18 different phone calls to have none returned. I sat with somebody in Scituate Harbor. Hi. I sat with somebody in Scituate Harbor for 2 hours, and he took 5 pages of notes and then never called me back. A friend of mine was walking on this boardwalk on an open house day, and I knew she was an engineer. And I said, "Could you ever stop for a minute, Ann?" And Ann Gilbert started to take a look at things, and we were going pretty good, right up to the point where everything locked down in January of 20. The last meeting that was held before the lockdown was with a house mover and a crane operator. We were moving to that stage of things. And then everything locked down. Come the fall, this became a much, much bigger project with the town taking a bigger role in it. And that's where Bobby and Shawn entered the picture. And I kind of get to step out. In between, this Ann Gilbert told Bob and I on the eve of a hurricane that maybe we should go up and put some boards in place. And so we saw that happened. So she was that level of concerned about the way the metal had degraded. In 1994, this light was relit after being dark for 134 years. When we were kids, when the society took it over, there was a blue light that flashed to landward. And then in 1991, they put a white light that flashed to landward. And in 94, it was relit officially as a private aid to navigation. And the fixture that's still up there was the one that was put in 1994. And the guy that was central to that was a guy named Joe Leppertz. And Joe came down to help me one day, and he said, "Pull that board off." And all oxidized metal. Just everything had rotted out and rotted away. That's when we knew that we were really, deep in hot water together. And now we're not. Now we are in a much, much better place. So I'll hand this off to Shawn to tell you how we got there.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Hi, folks. Thank you very much for that. I can't talk as eloquently about the history of this as these two gentlemen, but I'll do my best to kind of share the story of what we learned about this lighthouse, what we had to uncover, and how we went through the process of restoring it. It's very important, but we got to start at the beginning. So, our lighthouse first came into existence in 1811. The United States was just barely old enough to drink, and the Treasury Department had a very important job. They had to get trade going. They had to get merchant ships in. We had to start competing on the global scale. So they started a giant campaign to start erecting lighthouses all up the coast, from from Florida, well, you know, the territories, all the way up to the colonies. And in 1811, 3 gentlemen from Kingston built the first lighthouse here. I'm calling it Shorty here for short, because it wasn't very tall. And the granite blocks that comprise the first lighthouse are still the ones we see at the flared base here today. That bottom flared portion is the 1811 lighthouse. It wasn't very tall, and lighthouses, they serve 2 main functions, among many others. The first is they tell navigators out at sea, they answer 2 questions. The first is, where is the danger and where am I? Where is the danger answers the question, where's the land and the hazards? How close am I? How far am I? Just north off the coast of Scituate's Neck in Cohasset, we have Minot's Ledge and all the treacherous rocks that claim many, many, many lives. Bob can talk much more about that than I. They needed to be able to let folks know where that was. Additionally, they also needed to let folks know which lighthouse this was. Of the many that were being erected, how do you know what position you are in the dead of night? There's no spotlights, there's no city lights. You'd be lucky if you had a clear full moon and no clouds to be able to see where you were. So you needed lighthouses to help judge distance and tell where you were. Unfortunately, this lighthouse didn't do that great of a job. No offense to this lighthouse. It wasn't very tall, and the kind of lanterns that were employed were called spider lanterns, spider lamps. And they were reservoirs of whale oil with small little lamps, small little lights. And why do we need lighthouse keepers? To keep the light. They had to constantly refill the oil, constantly clean the glass to make sure the soot, it was a very dirty burn, soot was constantly shining out to sea. And they were very, very labor intensive. It didn't do much good, so about 16 years later, in 1827, they needed a change. We still had shipwrecks, we still had loss of life. So Marshal Lincoln in 1827 was contracted by the government to add a 15-foot superstructure of brick on top. That's the brick we see today. It's the next iteration. The contract, which we have a copy of, instructed him to take off that original lantern with the spider lamp, put it off to the side, build the superstructure, and put it back on top. So we didn't change the type of lantern, but we did elevate it much higher. And unfortunately, the shipwrecks continued. A notice to mariners, one major change they made states that from and after the 1st September next, the lighthouse at Scituate will exhibit 2 lights, one above the other. The lower one blood red, and the other one, the upper one, white. So they're trying to differentiate this lighthouse from others by adding a second light down below. But as I mentioned, really didn't do the job that they intended. By the time you get far enough out that you need to see the light, the red and the white have kind of blended together, and people were still mistaking this for Boston Harbor Light. They were still running into Minot's Ledge. There were still many tragic accidents. You can just see some of them here. Briggs George ashore, schooner ashore. All total loss, all hands lost, all drowned. It wasn't a good story. And this continued, so about the same amount of time between when the first lighthouse was constructed and the superstructure was added, they hired a gentleman named Winslow Lewis. He was a self-proclaimed inventor, patenter, constructor, builder, lighthouse extraordinaire, so he claimed. And he was building, restoring, and reconstructing lighthouses all up the shore. You can read about him online. He's a pretty well-known, well-documented individual, but he kind of had two bad reputations. The first is he happened to come up with patents a little close to when other folks over in Europe were coming up with the exact same inventions. No comment. His other kind of bad reputation was he kind of cut corners. He was charging premium prices, but he wasn't building with premium quality. There are many accounts, some lore of him having constructed brick walls for other lighthouses where they built a nice outer brick, nice inner brick, but the inside was just filled with junk. It wasn't solid brick in and out. Remember that. That's an important point. So he was contracted to take down that the first iteration of the lantern and build a brand new lantern. They call the lantern the whole room up there. It's not just the light, the whole thing they called the lantern. He tore down 4 feet of brick, remember that number, 4 feet of brick, rebuilt it with iron posts, to secure his new lantern, and he, of course, he added his nice, fancy new patented lamps that he invented himself with no help from anybody else. He left the blood red lamps down below, but it really still didn't do the job. Fortunately, though, within the next decade, the Fresnel lens was invented. And anybody who's heard of the Fresnel lens, these are these giant glass, beautiful, almost sculptures that are put inside lighthouses where, unlike the original spider lamps and every other lamp, which sends light upwards, outwards, downwards, wasting light when you want to get the light out to sea, the Fresnel lens used a series of cut and shaped pieces of glass to surround the flame, and it would take all that light pointing up and it would bend it straight out to sea. Extremely efficient, and it was probably one of the most important inventions in the 1800s. Completely changed the course of navigation forever.
We actually have a Fresnel lens at the Maritime Irish Mouse Museum that we got on loan from the government.
Do you know where that's from? Where
No,
the Fresnel
no,
lens?
no,
Yeah,
no.
that's the tough part.
But it's an interesting story because we had a bell which was given to the society and the government wanted it back. So they told Dave Ball, our ex-president, they want the bell back, and he said, you can't have it. And they said, it's ours. He said, no, it's not. He brought paperwork out that said it was given to us as a gift. So we had the bell, but we didn't mean anything to Scituate. So Dave said, I'll trade. I want a Fresnel lens on loan, and you can have the bell. It went back and forth, back and forth. Finally, they said, okay, you can have the lens. And he said, I've changed my mind. I said, now what? He said, I want a Lyle gun too. A Lyle gun is what you would shoot a rope up into the mast of a schooner and bring people off with a breeches buoy. So we got both of them for a bell that we didn't want. So I think Dave, he's an old Yankee, did a good job.
That's a good deal. That's a good deal. Thank you for that context. Sadly, though, this Fresnel lens came to Scituate a little too late. By this time, about 5 years later in 1860, they finally, after much pain and much loss of life, they constructed an offshore lighthouse on Minot's Ledge, which was really the place to put the lighthouse. By 1860, this became completely irrelevant. If you noticed, the lower level lights, where the old blood red lamps were, blocked in, the Fresnel lens removed. We have no idea where the Fresnel lens is, unfortunately. Could be in some other town's museum.
This is actually, if you talk about Minot's, this is a map of some of the shipwrecks at Minot's. I mean, huge loss of lives, and ships wrecked like you would not believe. Probably the brig St. John is the one most famous, where 99 Irish immigrants lost their lives with its side of shore. But if you can look, it's treacherous. There's reefs and ledges out there everywhere. And it was tough to get into Boston Harbor. If you're on a schooner, you're captive to the wind. So when a storm hits, you throw your anchor out, hope it holds, and usually it doesn't. And you end up on a reef or on a beach or wherever. So that's that.
Yeah. So the creation of Minot's Ledge Light really, really changed the course of navigation in this area. But unfortunately for Scituate Lighthouse, it started to fall into ruin. Before long, it became simply known as the Old Tower or Old Scituate Light. And I really like these series of photos because it actually shows you the slow decay over the next almost 90 years. The soapstone slabs that the original contract called for the deck of the lighthouse start falling one by one. You kind of see even more, the original iron posts that Winslow Lewis in 1841 installed, those are just sticking up and rotting. Hooligans, who look a lot better than most of us these days, are strewn about the place, hanging about.
Where was the opening for the red light?
Pardon?
Where was the opening for the red light?
It still exists. We can't see it from here, but it's on the other side of the brick tower.
Okay.
It still exists. They bricked it in.
No, I understand. I just
Yeah.
didn't know where it was.
Yeah, it's just on the other side, pointed out to shore. And, as Bob can talk about the incredible effort that the town made in saving the light, do you want to share a little bit about kind of the $4,000 to buy the lighthouse from the government?
Jamie Turner's wife saw an ad in the newspaper that the government was going to auction off Scituate Light without telling the town. She got a check from the select board, took the train into Boston, they actually postponed the sale, and Scituate ended up buying Scituate Light.
This old tower.
This old tower and the building, which was in bad shape. The town thought that a town is judged on its properties and spaces, and during the Depression they actually raised money and did the lighthouse over in 1930 with these new lantern work. It had been without anything up top for around 70 years. Crazy. So it was just a flat surface. When we took the concrete off and we took the lantern room off, in the middle, after the first concrete came off, was a survey bunker.
Geodetic survey.
They would set an instrument up there and they would shoot through church steeples, Carolina Hill or whatever. That's how they would get, you know, an accurate reading. I actually have a map that shows Scituate Light as that.
So they did their best, as you mentioned, in 1930. They reconstructed the lighthouse as best as they could have interpreted it. I don't know if they had access to that first photo that I showed you guys in 1841, which was the first photograph ever taken of the lighthouse, but they did their darndest and they did a beautiful job. A few years later, the National Park Service was established, and the Historic American Building Survey finally documented with a beautiful photograph, although it's a little washed out here, I apologize, the recently restored lighthouse in 1934. As Bob Gallagher mentioned, we relet it in 1991 after a few repairs, and here's a nice photo from 2005 when we recoated it with a new exterior coating. And this really shows the story of the 1811 lighthouse, the 1827 lighthouse, the 4-foot, remember that number, the 4-foot repairs by Winslow Lewis, in the 1930 lantern room. So we were brought on board to document everything, to measure everything, to draw, to really understand the story and try to figure out what issues were facing the lighthouse, as Bob had mentioned. And we found a lot. The original wrought iron 1930 posts that were going into the concrete, gone. This thing was at risk of being blown off and literally thrown off. Our copper was opening up, seams that Bob had mentioned he taped up. We opened up the deck, investigated everything, really tried to understand how this was put together because we wanted to be able to replicate it sensitively and accurately. A lot of the discoveries we made were incredible. Looking through the side of the scuttle, we were actually able to make out the different layers of the lantern deck. The original Winslow Lewis arch, dome rather, some rubble infill, the soapstone slabs that he put on that had slowly started decaying in those old photos, the slab with the survey marker that they were using to locate the heights of buildings, and the top slab that the 1930 edition went in. So it was really a remarkable journey. And a lot of what we anticipated as we prepared some deconstruction drawings for the restoration project was we wanted to originally preserve 2 of the outer layers of brick on the top. We wanted to remove the inner layers of brick, reconstruct the dome, give it a good base after we were gonna remove the lantern. And not unsurprisingly, we found evidence of those pieces of soapstone that were starting to fall down. We found them embedded in the concrete. In 1930, they didn't think of dismantling it and getting new soapstone. They said, well, we're restoring it. Let's pour concrete above and around all the soapstone to lock it in. And we have some of the soapstone right here from Scituate Light. In one of the contracts, way over on the left, it's too hard to read, Winslow Lewis was actually requested and contracted to restore the twin lighthouses on Thatcher's Island and Rockport. They're not still standing. But he was contracted to do that, and in that same contract, that's where he was directed to replace the soapstone and the lantern here. I reached out to the folks at Rockport, Thatcher's Island Association, to see if they knew anything about it. They had no idea that this even existed. And in my conversations, they said, well, you know what? We've got all these pie-shaped pieces of stone just lying around. I think someone's using them as their front step of their house for their porch. That must be the soapstone that Winslow Lewis used. And it matches the dimensions perfectly of down here at Scituate. So they're not sister lighthouses, but they kind of have a familial relationship. We were also able to find the original 8, not exactly 8, but most of the original iron posts that Winslow Lewis in 1841 installed, and we were able to salvage those. So Historical Society has some, the town has some, we've got a few soapstone pieces, and we were very careful to direct the contractor to salvage all of this.
Why soapstone?
It's extremely dense. It was kind of it was the trendy material at the time for decks. It's not very hard. It's a 3 on the Mohs scale, so it's not as hard as granite. much softer, but it's extremely dense and not porous, so easy to work with. And honestly, it's lasted beautifully since then. And as we started to demo some of the brick on the inside, we found junk infilled in those brick walls, just like people had alleged this gentleman, Mr. Lewis, for having done. Now, it's a good story to be able to say we were completely surprised by this and caught off guard and we had to scramble, but we really did anticipate this. So we weren't too surprised, but it was nice to be able to corroborate some of these stories.
When I got here, I thought I'd go out on the catwalk all the time. Right? How cool was that? When you go out, I remember I went out one early year, one of the first years, we were in the snowstorm. And I took this picture and I sent it to my sister in Oregon. She said, "You're crazy." I said, "No, it's fine." And then I asked, "What am I standing on?" No one could tell me. And maybe I was crazy.
So we proceeded with our restoration drawings. We were very careful to consider the historic fabric, all the original dimensions. We wanted to make sure that the work we were going to do was going to be as respectful and complementary to the work that had already done before. It's not always about going back to the very, very beginning. If we did that, we'd be about 40 feet lower. But it's about respecting the story and the evolution of these buildings and the work that people have done. The 1930 restoration is no less important than the 1841 work, no less important than the 1827 or 1811 work. So fortunately we were able to take those 4 feet down to the 1827 line, and here you can see what should have been done. Solid brick through and through, a great, great base. So we were able to reconstruct our dome. Our structural engineer worked on us, and the decision was made to do this in reinforced concrete, just for longevity. And when our deck was completed, it was time for us to worry about the lantern room. That was kind of our next charge. And we spent a lot of time documenting the lantern room, every single dimension, every little historic profile, all the wood, to make sure that we were replicating it as honestly and genuinely as possible. And we did just that. We took that lantern that was at risk of blowing off, hoisted it off, brought it down to the ground, and brought it into our general contractor's shop. And we basically replicated it one for one. We replicated the new one right next to it.
About our crazy lumberjack. Point right there, and there he is.
Yeah, that's it.
And he's up there probably taking a selfie.
Yeah, most likely. Most likely. OSHA was not happy about that, let's just say.
We watched, I teach at Marshall High, and I had one of the cameras and put it up, and my students watched it come down. And I think the whole class held its breath when they saw that guy at the top.
Yeah.
He was nuts.
Yeah. I'll hold my comments.
25, 16-year-olds holding their breath, you don't forget it.
Yeah, that's right. So we replicated this right next to it. We were able to make sure it matched exactly. We weren't taking any chances. A brand new galvanized iron frame put together, steel frame, clad in South American mahogany, beautiful white oak timbers for the dome roof, clad in copper. We made sure we did a lot of mock-ups. Mock-ups are kind of a quality control procedure where rather than just going full steam ahead, we make sure that the craftspeople do a sample for us. We come in, we review it, we make sure everybody's in agreement, and then we give them the green light. Critical part. To much fanfare, we brought our lantern back. Instead of threading one needle, we had to thread 24 needles, 24 bolts sticking up in that new concrete deck. It had to match perfectly. We were all holding our breath, but we knew it was going to work because we had spent a lot of time making sure that it was going to work with a nice template, making sure that everything was lined up. And with the lantern put back on, kind of near the end of this project, where we had to reconstitute the base. All the masonry, all the granite, all the brickwork. Here's another nice mock-up. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is the mock-up for the brick, and anybody with a good eye is going to notice that this brick does not match the brick below it. So it's a good thing we did a mock-up, because if we had just let them go full steam ahead, we would have had 2 different bricks on that lighthouse, and we would have never slept. So we were able to identify the correct brick. I found the yard that we were able to get matching brick from. Here's the correct one, here's the incorrect one, and we proceeded very, very quickly after that. One of our last challenges was, if you recall how the top of the lighthouse was so exposed to the elements for almost 80, 90 years, rainwater had just been driving through, washing everything out from the middle. Think of it like an Oreo. You got the outer, the inner, and then you have the cream filling. All the cream filling was deteriorated. It was washed out. So we needed to wrap this tower and inject it with grout, a very special type of grout that flows through all of the cavities, all the masonry, and rebinds that back together. We tried to do it before January. We wrapped it up. We got kerosene heaters, probably like 20 of them. It was a little comical, and we were trying to keep the temperature above a certain threshold because you can't let it drop or else the whole thing is shot. We tried our best, and we could not hold the temperatures. Challenge of marine environments. And we had to make a very difficult decision. It was a tough day, Bob, but we had to pull the plug and say, nope, we got to shut down for the winter and come back in May. And that's what we did. By May, we restarted. Everyone was ready to go.
There were flies that thought they were in Panama.
Yeah.
Oh, it was beautiful
like
inside.
Yeah.
But between the inside and that kind of wrapped shell, that tent, we just couldn't get it consistent enough for 24 plus
When
hours.
we wrapped it, we thought we should put a bow on it for Christmas.
That would have been appropriate.
I was inside that during a storm we had in January, I guess, of 24, and there was a fence wrapped around the project, right? When that fence hit that scaffolding, I was inside the bell, and I wished anything I had hit that button on the phone to record it because I was a minute late, but I was reverberating. It was an amazing sound.
Yeah. A real challenge with kind of marine projects. Today's a very nice day, but as you guys know, it doesn't stay that nice, especially when it gets into the colder months. And I think this is a great photo here. This is after the lantern was attached and clad in copper. This is between those two January and May months when we had to put everything on pause. Look how quickly the copper patinaed just from being so exposed to the salt air. This is like 20 years plus of patina just on this deck in 4 months. It's incredible. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working on historic buildings is what's the patina going to look like? How quickly is it going to patina? And you might ask yourself, that looks pretty red right now. You go to the other side, it's going to be much more green, especially on the deck. And we learned a lot of lessons from this. Our primary charge was be respectful of the story, be respectful of the past, do your best to kind of understand the journey that the building has been on because we're really the only voices that these buildings have. And if we can't speak for them, they can't speak for themselves. So I think we did an admirable job. The general contractor, all the subcontractors, the owner's project manager, the town, both Bob, the Historical Society. It was a real team effort, and we couldn't have done it with just one leader. Honestly, it really had to be a combined effort. So, I think we did the 1934 Historic American Building Survey photo justice because if you turn this black and white, I don't know if you've noticed much of a difference. So, it was a pleasure working on this.